Good morning, folks. Today for our second presenter, we have Mr. Jack Kirwan of Maynooth University in Ireland, who's come to us today to present on Twitch Plays Pokemon. So please enjoy.
Hi, give me a moment. I'm just gonna make sure I pull up my notes, just so I don't get completely lost. Okay. No, I gotta sit. Sorry, I'm a walker, so I tend to like wander around in presentations. So sitting is going to be a new experience. So the first thing I want to point out is that, like, if you look at this wonderful bit of fan art, like Twitch Plays Pokemon is utter nonsense to anyone who doesn't know what it is. This makes a lot of sense if you spent like years looking at this for some reason, because you're a lunatic. So the top is the Helix fossil, which became kind of like the god. Below are various Pokemon who, were in the party. Then as we go lower, it's Pokemon who were less used. And then finally we get to a Flareon and a Dome fossil, which became kind of the reviled figures. But I believe that's an SS ticket, because this image was made like halfway through their playthrough. So the SS ticket was still a thing. All of this makes no sense, but we'll get there. Twitch Plays Pokemon, my general thesis that I've been working on is that it can provide insights into the process of creativity online through narrative analysis and text mining. Now, it's a bit narrative, like it's a bit academic and dense, but we'll get there. So first thing, in case anyone's not aware of what Twitch Plays Pokemon is, in 2014, when the Twitch channel was just starting up, Twitch Plays Pokemon was basically Guy, I believe he's Australian, ran an instance of Pokemon Red, where viewers controlled it by inputting like up, down, start, A, B into the chat window. And at a certain stage, they also had to introduce democracy and anarchy, which anarchy was the original style of play, where whatever was put into the chat would get like processed and played. Whereas democracy would be like 20 seconds and we'll pick whatever was used most. Big contentious issue. But as you can imagine, a couple of 100,000 people trying to play a game at the same time, not a great style of play. Pretty messy, it was painfully slow. Like they would encounter things like a ledge and it would cost them like a day. They would just spend a day trying to not go off the ledge and get to their goal. And this was probably the biggest problem they had. Like another important example we'll get to is that like things like fishing in Pokemon, utterly impossible with the style of play. You just cannot do it. And it was unpredictable while being predictable. They could predict, obviously, everything was going to happen in the game. Like Pokemon Red came out in 1995, so like everybody knew what was going to happen, but how it was going to happen, what they were going to do, impossible for them to know. So the reason I picked it up for a study is that it's 16 days of comments, video, and related art, albums. Like there's a lot of stuff related to it. And this is actually really useful because most like internet collaborative creative kind of things are either A, tied to like a specific TV show or product and it goes on for years, which, where are you going to study, let's say, the supernatural fandom? Do you go to Twitter? Do you go to Tumblr? Do you go to Reddit? Like it's 15, 20 years of stuff. Like, where'd you go? This is 16 days. It's relatively small. It's only 40 million comments on Twitch and only 20 million on Reddit. That's manageable, apparently. So we do run into a bit of a problem, which is what is distributive creativity. Now, if you read my thesis, there's like 15,000 words on this. So I've really condensed it. But basically, Amabile provided a definition of creativity as the production of novel and useful ideas by an individual or small group of individuals working together. Now, useful is a broad term in this sense. It's not necessarily useful like to society in a broad sense. It's useful in the sense of how do we play a Pokemon game when we can't actually decide what we're doing? Like how do we navigate that? What do we need to avoid? And the distributive creativity is defined as a non-individualistic creative process. And this is a bit of a tricky one because, this isn't like a theater troupe coming together to put on a staging of, actually when I was at university, we had a great like parody of the Metal Gear Solid games. But they're all coming together with love of Metal Gear Solid with the aim of putting Metal Gear Solid on as this stage show. So basically, when we're looking at distributive creativity in this sense, it's a non-individualistic process of production of novel and useful ideas. So it's a bit unusual. One of the reasons I started studying Twitch Plays Pokemon, two big reasons. Three. So there's a guy, Sawyer, he's an American academic who studied collaborative creative groups, so like theater groups and jazz groups. And he did this throughout the 90s and 2000s, and he ran into this problem where he's going, yeah, every time I sit down, they get weirded out and confused by me being there, even though they've agreed for me to be there. I don't know how much more we can get from studying in person. So what he did is he decided, well, maybe we need to wait till groups on the internet are happening. We can study what they did after they've done it. Similarly, Bennis and Biederman are two guys who were studying like collaborative creative groups that were like more production companies, like Disney, like big companies, and tried to find commonalities between their successes. The two ones that are most relevant here is they found that people who were focused on a shared goal, good. People who have a little bit of disagreement about what they're going to do about that shared goal, also good. But keyword, there's a little bit of disagreement. And then, also found that, sorry, my brain, that a little bit of a looser leadership is important. Like you do not want someone coming down from on high and telling everyone what to do. You need a little, give. But one of the other reasons I decided to study Twitch Plays Pokemon, aside from Sawyer's like study collaborative creative groups, is because I realized that if I did it, I would be a Pokemon professor. So kind of obviously had to do that. I mean, inevitably. So excuse my graphs, but for some reason, my supervisors back in Ireland, every time I make a graph, which is basic shapes in Photoshop, they go, my God, the man's a genius. So I just keep doing that. So something that's important to look at with these things is that like, we're not looking at a single group. So like, one I've been watching actually somewhat in preparation for coming over here. I've never been to an anime convention or America, so I ended up watching The Witch from Mercury quite a lot. But what place do you look at a fandom is going to really change your perception of the fandom. If you look at it on Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, that's three very different groups. So the reason we need to separate it out is so we understand like what is this group. So like Twitch Plays Pokemon is obviously primarily on the Twitch channel. And from there, like users slowly spread out to other communities. And when I say slowly, I'm talking like in 10 hours after being online. And they go to actually, I think it was GameFAQs for the first place that they actually went to, but there's no actual recorded stuff, so I can't say that. The only thing I could record is I definitely went to 4chan pretty quick, then Reddit, Twitter, Tumblr, and then there's a whole bunch of forums that I don't know that anyone uses. And then the next stage is you've got to keep in mind, of course, then it becomes like a news thing of like, what are all these weirdos doing playing this Pokemon game? Like there's a bunch of them. So like at that stage, it goes to like news sites, and you got to also consider people start making fan art and YouTube music videos and stuff. So it's like a primary Twitch, secondary social media, and then eventually it goes to tertiary sites, which is just the news sites. Sorry, got to drink some water. All right, so community leaders, pretty much there are none. The guy who's streaming was incredibly hands-off, did have the one big thing where everyone got really into the notion that like whatever we put in is going to get played. This made a very messy style of play, but he didn't think it was important. And everyone else was like, no, this is vitally important. And then he decided, nah, what we need to do is we need to use a system of democracy where whatever people put in the most, that's what's getting played. And this created a bit of a problem because it just became a whole anarchy, democracy, dome versus the helix. Like, that's it, that's all the showdown. But there's some interesting data on that, where if you actually look at it, democracy was a lot more popular than anyone would suspect by just looking at the social media. So if you look at the social media, everyone's going, democracy sucks, we're never going to use that, we have riots and so on. But when you actually look at the data, democracy was really popular. Like, it was used a lot. Then, and this is fairly basic and obvious, they shared the goal of completing Pokemon Red as a community. Now, how they want to complete that is different. So there's a bit of disagreement. Some of them are like, democracy is a cheat and this is fundamentally not the game. Others are like, however we can complete this as a group, that's it, we're going to do that. Again, another awful graph. So one of the reasons we got to separate this out as well is that when I say Twitch plays Pokemon, what the hell am I talking about? There's a Twitch channel, which is, a bunch of video and chat, and it's 16 hours, 9 days of just people trying to navigate Lavender Town. Like, it just goes on and on and on. So like, if you guys don't know what Twitch plays Pokemon was, and were like, I would love to know more about this, you would never want to go to the Twitch channel. You just spent ages trying to watch this nothing. Although they do still play games that, more modern ones. Narrative levels are a thing that a academic called Gannett came up with, and it's basically this. So you have I'm trying to pick a story. You have a story that's being told to you, and that's like the diegetic narrative. That's the, like, this is the things that definitely happened. But then let's say the character gives their backstory. Well, that's like a little level lower, because that's a story in a story. And it's not certain if that story is true. The character could be lying, but like, and then it just goes lower, lower, lower. So I adapted this to basically split this whole thing out. And so we got the ludic narrative, which is, that's the game. Everyone can agree what definitely happened in the game happened. So, sorry, I skipped over. But basically, narrative levels are just the narrator and the narration. It's just the relation between that. It sounds complicated, but that's all it is. So the ludic is concerned with the acts of play. But then around this, you also have this whole thing of people talking about, like, what are we going to do when we need to, like, surf? We need to get a water Pokemon. How are we going to do that? And that is the discourse, which I imagine a lot of people here are very familiar with various forms of discourse from various fandoms. But it's just the interaction between, like, that is the story that they're almost telling themselves about Twitch plays Pokemon. There's an image that I probably should put in here instead of all of my awful graphs, but it's a guy on 4chan who's basically just having a moment of going, wait, what? I'm watching a bunch of people play a game from 1995, and they have a massive disagreement about democracy and anarchy, and also we've put like a whole religious context on this, but everyone's getting along, and what am I doing? Just that moment of like, wait, what are we doing? But while there's this discursive aspect, when they're talking, they're also kind of like, well, they're fictionalizing the narrative. They're deciding, oh, so one of the problems they obviously had, you catch a Pokemon, you name a Pokemon. You got 100,000 people playing at once. You don't really name Pokemon anything that makes sense. So you get like A, B, K, G, and so they go, Bird Jesus, that'll do. Or Abby for the starter. And it just goes like that. A lot of nicknames. I'm particularly fond, and actually the community is as well, of Digrat. So they caught a Rattata, obviously. Solid Pokemon, it'll get you through a lot of the game. But they thought it had Dig. So they'd be just trying to get through something, and inevitably someone would use Dig. And it was like, well, guess those 5 hours of our lives are gone. We're going to have to start this again. But when the fictionalizing happened, this is stuff like they picked up the Helix fossil pure chance. And they would inevitably like open their items, open the Helix fossil. Oh, this is not the time to use this. So then over time, they kind of had to go, why are we doing this? Why is the character always opening their items to look at the helix fossil? And the idea that came up was that they were consulting it like it was a holy thing. And when they opened other items that they weren't supposed to use, those became unholy things. They're supposed to consult the helix fossil, not the SS ticket. But the reason they have to do this is because when you're playing the game, this makes no sense because you have the character going around in circles. So the initial fan art starts as being this robot that's being controlled by people. And then eventually they switch to it being this kind of Lovecraftian kind of notion where all the players are this horrible hive mind that is parasitically infested this 10-year-old, which is a little crazy and dark and kind of strange because it makes the players kind of the villains in a lot of ways. But you got to fictionalize it because otherwise it makes no sense even in the context of a Pokemon game. Don't worry, we will get some actual Pokemon. Then the last thing we need is the concept of Narians. And the reason this is important, sorry, water again, is that, oh, no, don't want to go that. Okay, so Narians are not memes. This is kind of important. Meme, basic unit of cultural information, or shocked Pikachu face, either or. And then Narians are a thing that God, we've spent in the academic community. Narians occur back in the 60s with a guy called Dorfman, and he was studying medieval chivalric romances. So Narians are often the virtuous princess or the challenge that a knight faces between their ideals. Funnily enough, if you think of Game of Thrones, Jaime Lannister is a good example of a lot of chivalric romances, the core conflict. He doesn't quite resolve it well, but and they're similar to a thing called mythemes that Vladimir Prop came up. And the reason I put that in is because if I don't, my supervisors get really annoyed. Mythemes are the general thing of there's so many cultures have that. There's a guy and he moves the sun from one side of the sky to the other side of the sky. Who that guy is, different. How he does it, different. Is he a dung beetle? I don't know. Is he a guy in a chariot? Maybe. But the reason that I think that they're different is that mythemes are trying to describe a really broad thing. So Vladimir Prop was basically studying how different stories are related to each other. But Dorfman was just studying well, here's the things that are specific to medieval romances. So basically the specificity of Narians to an area of fiction is useful to avoid the overbroad parallels of a Sundara is not necessarily going to be the same in different genres, and you kind of need to keep that in mind. And the example that I was aiming to use is that, so a meme in its traditional sense could be a tune, right? I'm a big fan of, in Ireland, it's called Johnny We Hardly Knew You. It's a tune from the 1600s. Over here, it's Johnny Comes Marching Home. The tune is a meme. It's just a cultural unit of information. Or, of course, the classic shock Pikachu face. But then a Narim is the thing of someone singing a tune to their kid to get them to go to sleep, because it has that little bit of no, that's a problem, a solution, and a little bit of a resolution. It's just the tiniest bit of narrative. In Pokemon, I generally go with the notion of the Team Rocket is going to try capture Pikachu is that very basic level of Narium, very small, simple, fundamental. So we'll get through this pretty quick because it's just dense text mining, sentiment analysis stuff. So again, one of the reasons I studied this, it's 16 days. It's actually a manageable amount of data at 60 million, whatever. Required access to the data, which means that so Tumblr, you can't, using the API is a nightmare. It's not that it's useless data. Trying to get it to work with anything is a nightmare. So they just sort of wrote it off initially. I should have used Twitter, but fortunately Twitter changed all of its rules and made it expensive. So I was able to then, instead of getting the Twitter data, just sort of say to people look, I can't access this anymore. It's too expensive. So basically the Twitch chat was all on the Internet Archive, which if you guys are like ever want to look at some really weird old stuff, the Internet Archive is a absolute wonderful place. You can get all these old like science fiction magazines that have been digitized, like random weather channels from Sweden. It's wonderful, ridiculous stuff. And then Reddit, because I was just about able to grab stuff. I'm gonna fucking mosey. So sentiment analysis is, sorry, text mining is how we go, like how popular is things. Sentiment analysis is us using the idea of you know, what words imply to figure out how a community feels. So this is the Twitch Plays Pokemon's feelings. Couple of interesting things here. The word like God and Lord show up a lot. So obviously we got to take that into context. Like it's obviously disgust is pretty low on the list, which I think is probably a good indicator, but it's also used for positive things because praise the Lord or oh Lord kind of notions. I think an interesting thing is that riot is actually the highest thing in anger. That's because when democracy was introduced, they did a thing where they put start 9 in, which would just input the start thing like 9 times and just stall the game for a while because they just wanted to say democracy sucks. But generally, it's a quite positive community. I think that's partially due to reading from Pokemon. And it's important to note that anticipation is incredibly high, but surprise is very low because they know the game, but they're also wondering, how are we going to do things? So we're finally going to talk about a Narium, like a thing in Twitch Plays Pokemon. So the false prophet. So in the pursuit of the like ludic or gameplay need for a water Pokemon, which you need to complete the game to get to Cinnabar Island, there was a bit of a contentious thing of, do we get the Lapras? Do we get Eevee and try evolve into Vaporeon? They thought we can do Vaporeon. Did not work well. So they ended up buying like 5 Firestones, 1 Water Stone, evolved into Flareon. Their starter was a Charmander. It did not go well. They hated things. It's useless. And they were stuck in the Rocket Maze, which was a nightmare. And then Democracy's introduced, and they just like loaded all of this onto this one Flareon Pokemon as the bad thing. Went to try to get rid of it. Ended up getting rid of almost all their Pokemon that were of any use because, again, they can't do basic things. They can't fish. They can't go to the Pokemon box to switch things out. Can't change team order or moves. They cannot do these things. And community engagement kind of dropped. And this is where the discursive, like the discussion about it, they start going, Flareon's the false prophet. We need to get rid of Flareon. We will be cursed forever, kind of stuff. And so like artists created fictional pieces to reinforce this. And that's where we got to finally get some fan art. And you can see here, like, these are all different Nariums that are related. So like first one on the right, you get, this is Flareon as this awful evil creature. Then next to it is Flareon as this guy who's like standing up for the trainer that's being possessed by this awful hive mind. These things kind of coexist. It's up to you to pick up what one you want. You know, then we have him as the entity of the dome, or just him being blamed for stuff. And again, wrapping up a little quick. So the thing that we found by doing this is that community has a motivation by sharing a goal, in this case, completing Pokemon. They run into an obstacle, in this case, the Rocket Maze, that they could not navigate. Democracy's introduced. They wanted to get this water Pokemon, doesn't go that way. And so because of that obstacle, the community's motivation drops. And I thought that like the art was coming out before motivation dropped, but it comes out after. So things like the false prophet, if you look at the graphs, become popular when they hit a challenge. And then the artists create artwork to kind of motivate the community forward to keep pursuing that. So like they create, we gotta beat Flareon and the Dome. These are evil things. Domocracy is terrible. Or they create the, you know, Flareon didn't die for this, guys. You know, we gotta get together and end this so like, you know, the player character can be free. And that increases motivation. And then again, you know, they run into more obstacles, like again, a ledge. And the whole thing, you know, falls apart again. Ledge was a little more difficult for them to kind of create fan art about, but man, they create some good stuff about it. So this is the very academic list of people I referenced. But, and this is an important question, while I was studying this, did I have a Pokemon? Absolutely. That is my Sylveon with a little lint bell, which is like a soothe bell, tied around its neck, and was there the entire time. I am 100% an Eevee person. The false prophet did nothing wrong, and everyone who says so, nah. But that's up to me. It's up to you guys as well. I would highly advise, like, if you want to look up a weird thing, have a look at this and see anything. If you want to ask me any questions, I will be outside, and you can email me at jackjohnkirwan@gmail.com. And I believe that is time. Okay. By the way, I have greatly enjoyed coming to America for the first time, and the con has been an absolute pleasure. Actually, almost as kind of What's that? Oh, yes.
Oh, you can do speaker slots from here? Oh, then that makes my life easier.